What's the most terrifying sound in the world? It's not a scream in the woods. It's the sound of your doorknob slowly turning at 3 a.m. when you know you're supposed to be completely alone. From a psycho stalker in a yellow raincoat to a late-night call that was coming from inside the building, these 3 terrifying encounters actually happened. And the worst part, you could be next. I was living alone in a small 1-story rental house just outside of town when this happened. The place was situated at the very end of a short, dead-end gravel road. There were only about 5 other houses on the entire street, and at night the whole neighborhood became completely pitch black and dead silent. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, so my schedule was pretty messed up. Most days I didn't even leave the house unless I absolutely had to run to the grocery store. Because of that, I rarely, if ever, got unexpected visitors. My friends always texted me way ahead of time before coming over. And that's exactly why the first knock on my door immediately caught me off guard. It was around 8:45 p.m. on a Thursday. Outside it was dark and freezing. I was chilling in the living room, watching a movie on TV with all the lights off except for the glow of the screen. Out of nowhere, I heard 4 firm, heavy knocks on the front door. I froze. I grabbed the remote and instantly muted the TV. The entire house went dead quiet. I sat there, straining my ears, honestly thinking that maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. But then, a few seconds later, there were 2 more knocks, this time louder. I got up from the couch and slowly walked down the hallway to the front door. There was a small peephole right in the center of the wood. I pressed my eye against it, and when I looked through, I saw a guy standing on my porch under the dim amber porch light. He was holding a medium-sized cardboard box in his arms. He was wearing a dark windbreaker jacket and a baseball cap pulled down slightly over his eyes. He looked totally normal, maybe mid-30s. I didn't open the door all the way. I kept the security chain locked on and cracked it only a few inches. A rush of cold air hit my face. I asked, "Can I help you?" The guy immediately looked up and said in a very flat, monotone voice, "I have a delivery that requires a signature, sir." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handheld scanner device. He looked down at the screen and read a name out loud. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. I told him calmly, "Sorry, man, you've got the wrong address. No one by that name lives here." The guy didn't move. He just stared down at the box, then looked at his device, then looked back at me. He read the street address out loud. It was my exact address, house number, street name, everything. A weird knot formed in my stomach. I repeated myself a bit firmer this time. "Look, I don't care what the paper says. Nobody by that name lives here. You have the wrong house." He just stared at me through the crack of the door for a second longer than necessary. His eyes were completely vacant. It was incredibly unsettling. Finally, he gave a slow nod and said, "All right, must have been a glitch in the system. I'll take it back to the truck." I watched through the peephole as he turned around and walked down my driveway. Now, my house had a pretty long driveway, and I expected to see a delivery van, or at least a regular car with hazard lights on, parked on the curb. But there was absolutely nothing. The street was completely empty. The guy walked past my mailbox, reached the corner of the dead-end street, and just vanished into the darkness. He was on foot. I shut the door and locked all the deadbolts. I tried to rationalize it to myself. I figured maybe he was a third-party independent contractor driving an unmarked vehicle parked further down the main road. I told myself to stop being paranoid. But the next night, Friday, proved me wrong. At almost the exact same time, around 8:45 p.m., I was working at my desk when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. My heart literally dropped into my chest. I didn't make a sound. I slipped off my shoes and crept over to the door, placing my eye against the peephole. It was the exact same guy. Same jacket, same hat, and he was holding the exact same cardboard box. I was officially creeped out. I decided right then and there that I wasn't opening that door even an inch. I just spoke loudly through the wood. "Hey, I told you yesterday you have the wrong house. Stop coming here." There was a long, suffocating silence from the other side. Then his muffled voice came through the door. "I just need a signature, sir. The system says this package has to be delivered tonight. Please just sign for it." I yelled back, "I'm not signing for a package I didn't order for a person I don't know. Leave right now or I'm calling the cops." After I threatened to call the police, there was another long pause. Through the peephole, I watched him slowly step back from the door. But instead of walking away down the driveway, he did something incredibly bizarre. He walked to the edge of my porch and stood there. Then, very slowly, he began to rotate his head. He looked directly at my front living room windows. Then he turned his head and stared down the dark side of my house toward the backyard. Then he looked back at the front door. He was literally casing the house right in front of me, checking for security cameras, windows, or any other entry points. He stood there doing this for a solid 20 seconds before he finally walked down the driveway and disappeared into the night. And once again, there was no vehicle. By Saturday night, I was a nervous wreck. I kept all the lights in the front of the house completely off. I sat in the dark, constantly looking at the clock. But strangely, Saturday night was completely quiet. No knocks, no footsteps. I felt a massive wave of relief. I even laughed at myself, thinking maybe the guy finally realized his mistake and gave up. I had no idea how wrong I was. Criminals don't just give up. They wait for the right opportunity. Sunday night arrived. It was around 9 p.m. and I was in the kitchen washing some dishes. The sound of the running water was filling the room. Suddenly, right over the sound of the water, I heard a sharp sound. Knock, 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 knock. 4 knocks, but they weren't at the front door. They were coming from the side of the house, right against the glass of my dining room window. My stomach turned to ice. I turned off the faucet and stood completely frozen. I slowly crept into the dining room and peeked through the blinds. No one was there, but a split second later, bam, 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 bam. 4 massive, aggressive knocks slammed against the front door. I bolted down the hallway, completely terrified, and looked through the peephole. It was him again, but this time something was entirely different. His hands were completely empty. There was no cardboard box. There was no scanner. He wasn't pretending to be a delivery driver anymore. I kept completely quiet, holding my breath. He knocked again, harder this time. Then he took a step back and stared directly into the peephole. It felt like he was looking straight through the door and directly into my soul. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway so he couldn't see any movement or shadows from the inside. After about 30 seconds of silence, he turned and walked off the porch. I waited 5 full minutes. Then I went around the house, keeping low to the ground, and peeked through the blinds. Across the street, right at the edge of the woods where the streetlights couldn't reach, I saw a figure standing there. It was him. He was just standing in the pitch black, facing my house, staring at it. After a minute, he backed up into the woods and vanished. The next morning, I called the local police non-emergency line and told the officer everything. The officer listened and gave me a chilling explanation. He told me, "Son, this sounds like a classic case of occupancy verification. Burglars do this all the time. They knock on doors with a fake package. If someone answers, they make up an excuse and leave, marking the house as occupied. But if no one answers after a few nights, they know the house is empty and they force entry. Lock your doors, get some cameras, and if he comes back, call 911 immediately." That night, I was terrified. I turned off every single light in the house to make it look completely empty, and I sat in my bedroom at the back of the house with my phone in my hand. Right on cue, at 8:45 p.m., I heard it. 4 knocks at the front door. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, 4 more heavy knocks. Then silence. I waited in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A minute passed. Then I heard a totally different sound coming from the back of the house. Thud, thud. It sounded like someone putting weight against my back door. I quietly slipped out of my room and stood in the dark hallway. From there, I had a clear line of sight to the back door leading to the patio. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, I watched the metal doorknob. It slowly turned to the right, stopped, then slowly turned to the left. Someone was trying the knob. Then I heard a faint scraping sound, like a crowbar or a screwdriver sliding into the doorframe, trying to pop the latch. There was definitely more than one person out there, and at the exact same time, the knocking started up again at the front door. They were trying to see if anyone would run to the front while someone else forced the back. I immediately dialed 911. I whispered into the phone, "Someone is breaking into my house right now. Please hurry." The dispatcher told me officers were on their way and to stay on the line. After what felt like an eternity, the scraping stopped. A few moments later, the loud, echoing sounds of police sirens filled the neighborhood. When the cops searched the perimeter, they found deep, fresh pry marks on my back door frame, right next to the deadbolt. The officer told me that if I hadn't called when I did, they would have popped that door open in another 2 minutes. I didn't sleep there that night. I packed a bag and stayed at my brother's apartment across town. 2 days later, the police called me with an update. They had arrested the guy in a nearby neighborhood after a neighbor caught him trying to break into a house while the owners were out of town on vacation. When they searched his car, they found a stack of empty cardboard boxes, a crowbar, and a fake plastic scanner. During questioning, he admitted to the whole setup. He told detectives that he would check the lights of a house over a few days. If the lights were on one night and completely dark the next, he assumed the owners had left for a trip, and that's when he would strike. Hearing that sent chills down my spine. It made me realize just how close I came to a nightmare. If I had ignored the door on those first couple of nights, or if I hadn't been home, he would have broken in while I was asleep, thinking the house was empty. I moved out of that house 3 months later when my lease ended. To this day, if I get an unexpected knock on my door at night, I don't answer it. I don't care who it is. I keep the lights off, I stay quiet, and I check my security cameras first, because you never really know who is standing on the other side of that door, or what they are really looking for. The next story. This happened back in 2010 when I was just 6 years old. Even though I was incredibly young, every single detail of that night is burned into my brain. If I close my eyes right now, I can still see it all playing out like it happened yesterday. At the time, we lived in a quiet, tight-knit suburban neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. My household consisted of my mom, my older brother, my older sister, and me. My dad was away on deployment with the US Army at the time, so the house always felt a little empty and lonely without him there to protect us. Our home was a duplex, meaning our wall was shared directly with our next-door neighbors. Usually in places like that, you can hear almost anything if it's loud enough, but on this specific night, the weather completely isolated us. It was pouring down rain, one of those heavy, freezing Pacific Northwest storms that drowns out every other sound. It was late, and everyone else in the house had already gone to bed, but my mom and I were sitting out on the covered front porch. She was smoking a cigarette, and I was curled up right next to her, listening to the rhythmic pounding of the rain against the roof. I had no idea that this peaceful rainy night was about to turn into a living nightmare. As my mom and I were enjoying the cool air, my eyes randomly drifted toward the street in front of our house. Walking right down the middle of the asphalt was a person. He was wearing this bright, oversized yellow rain jacket. It was pouring buckets, but he didn't have an umbrella. He was just letting the rain hit him, walking with this slow, aimless, unsettling stride. Seeing anyone wandering the streets at that hour in a storm was weird enough, but then he changed direction. He turned and started walking straight up our driveway. My stomach dropped instantly. My mum noticed him too. She froze, holding her cigarette halfway to her mouth, just staring. She quickly dropped the cigarette onto the porch floor and crushed it out with her shoe, grabbing my hand tightly. The man in the driveway walked up to the side of our house where our large garbage cans were lined up and just stopped. The hood of his yellow jacket was pulled way down, hiding his face in the shadows, but I could feel it. He was staring directly at us on the porch. My mom didn't waste a single second. She yanked my arm to pull me inside, but right as we turned, the man in the driveway let out a blood-curdling, aggressive shriek. I can't remember the exact words he screamed. I was way too young and terrified, but the raw rage in his voice was enough to make me burst into tears. My mum practically lifted me off my feet, threw me inside the house, and slammed the front door shut, locking it instantly. As soon as we were inside, she started rushing through the living room, flipping off every single light switch. In seconds, the entire house was plunged into pitch-black darkness. I was trembling, sobbing quietly into my hands. Hearing the commotion, my brother and sister crept out of their rooms. My mum held a finger to her lips and whispered, "Be completely quiet. Don't make a sound." She gathered all three of us and led us into her bedroom, forcing us all onto her king-sized bed. We huddled underneath the thick blankets, paralyzed with fear. Outside, the rain kept pounding, but the man had stopped screaming. Eventually, from pure emotional exhaustion, we all managed to drift off to sleep. But my sleep didn't bring any peace. I had a horrifying nightmare that night, one that still scares me today. I dreamed that the man in the yellow raincoat was standing right outside my bedroom window, pressing his face flat against the glass, staring in at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The dream felt so intensely real that I gasped and sat straight up in bed. I was drenched in sweat, shivering uncontrollably. I couldn't handle it anymore, so I shook my sister awake and started crying, whispering, "I'm scared, I'm scared." Seeing how terrified I was, my sister got out of bed and led me by the hand into the master bathroom attached to the room. She shut the bathroom door so our whispering wouldn't wake up our mum or brother, and tried to calm me down. "It's okay," she whispered. "It was just a bad dream. There's nobody out there." But before she could even finish her sentence, the entire house shook. Bang! 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 Someone wasn't just knocking on our front door, they were violently kicking it, throwing their entire body weight against the wood. The sound was so deafeningly loud that it echoed fiercely inside the bathroom. My sister didn't hesitate. She threw the bathroom door open and rushed over to wake our mum. But Mum was already awake, sitting up in shock. My brother was up too. The banging on the front door was relentless. Bang! 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 Mum was frantically gesturing for the three of us to get back inside the bathroom. We huddled together on the tile floor, gripping each other for dear life. Then we heard his voice through the walls. The man was outside, completely losing his mind, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Open the door! Let me in! Open the door right now!" Mum was desperately crawling around the dark bedroom floor, trying to find her old BlackBerry phone to call 911, but in the blind panic and darkness, she couldn't find it anywhere. We were completely trapped, with no way to call for help and no dad home to protect us. We felt completely helpless. We prayed that our duplex neighbors would hear the insane slamming and call the cops for us. The man kicked and screamed at our door for what felt like 10 agonizing minutes. But strangely, nobody came. No neighbors looked out, and no sirens echoed down the street. Eventually, the screaming faded, and the kicking stopped. The night went completely silent again, save for the pouring rain. We stayed locked in that bathroom until the sun finally came up. The next morning, we notified the police, but they found no trace of the guy. Weeks went by, and we slowly convinced ourselves that the crazy person had left the area for good. But we were dead wrong. The real horror was waiting for us a few weeks later. My dad was still overseas. One morning, we walked down into the living room and froze. Our heavy front door was standing wide open, letting the cold morning air inside. We looked around in shock and noticed that one of our living room windows was pushed all the way up, and the mesh window screen had been brutally sliced open with a knife. Someone had cut their way inside while we slept. My mum immediately called 911. While waiting for the police, we started checking the house. A few valuable electronics from the living room were gone, and some things were missing from Mum's drawers. But when I walked into my own bedroom, my heart completely sank. Right next to my bed was a small nightstand. Sitting on that nightstand was my ceramic piggy bank, where I had been saving all my birthday and Christmas cash. It was gone. But what truly made my blood run cold was what else they took. Right next to my piggy bank was a massive glass vase that my family used to collect loose change and dollar bills. That heavy vase sat just inches away from where my head had been resting on my pillow. This meant that while this intruder was stealing my piggy bank and lifting that heavy glass vase, my siblings, my mum and I were all asleep in that exact same room, completely vulnerable. He was standing right over us in the dark, listening to us breathe. He could have done anything to us, but he chose to just take the cash and slip away into the night. The police never caught the intruder, and they never found the man in the yellow raincoat. We never officially found out if they were the same person or two different creeps targeting our house. But a few days after the burglary, a weird detail made the whole thing even more haunting. I was walking down our street past a house owned by a quiet middle-aged man who lived completely alone and rarely ever came outside. As I walked by, I happened to glance up at his front porch. Sitting right there on a table was a massive glass vase completely filled with cash and coins. It looked identical to the one stolen from right next to my head. I stood there on the sidewalk, a 6-year-old kid, completely frozen with fear and confusion. Should I tell my mum? Should I call the cops? I was too terrified to say anything, so I just kept walking. To this day, whenever a heavy rainstorm hits at night, I still picture that bright yellow raincoat cutting through the dark. And before I close my bedroom blinds for the night, I always double-check the locks on the doors and windows. Because some nightmares don't stay in your dreams. Sometimes they walk right inside your home.
The next story. This happened back in the late fall of 2020, during a time when the world felt completely upside down. I was working as a customer support agent for a major corporate call center located in a bleak, isolated industrial park in New Jersey. Our company handled technical troubleshooting for a well-known national home security provider. I was the new guy on the block, which meant I got stuck with the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. If you've ever worked third shift, you know how weird it gets. The bustling energy of the daytime completely vanishes and the call volume drops significantly. But that specific night was entirely different. Because of the social distancing protocols back then, our massive office floor was virtually empty. There were only about 4 or 5 agents scattered across dozens of dark, empty cubicles. Our shift supervisor had already retreated into his private office around midnight to catch some sleep. By 2:15 a.m., the floor was dead silent. The only sound was the sporadic, hollow clicking of my own keyboard. I took a final sip of my black lukewarm coffee, trying to stay awake. Right then, my headset let out a sharp, crisp chime. Beep, beep. I glanced at my monitor. The caller ID fields for the name and location were completely blank. It just read, unknown number. I clicked my mouse and took the call. Hello, thank you for calling Home Security Support. My name is Ryan. How can I help you tonight? I said, using my standard robotic customer service voice. There was no answer, just the heavy, rhythmic sound of someone breathing directly into their microphone. I figured it was a bad connection, or maybe an elderly customer who had accidentally dialed the wrong number. I adjusted my headset and tried again. Hello, sir or ma'am, can you hear me? This time, A sound came through, but it wasn't a normal voice. It sounded like someone had pressed their lips right against the receiver, whispering something in a low, frantic, and completely garbled tone. The words were incoherent, sounding less like English and more like a bizarre, rhythmic chanting. "Hello, I'm sorry, your line is breaking up. Could you speak up, please?" I asked, getting a bit uncomfortable. Suddenly, the whispering cut off completely, and in the very next second, a sound blasted through my headset that made my stomach drop. It was a loud, high-pitched, manic laugh, a raspy, inhuman cackle that echoed straight into my ears. Goosebumps exploded across my arms. Terrified, I slammed my finger on the mouse and disconnected the line. I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. I tried to tell myself it was just some stupid teenager pulling a prank. Prank calls are common on the night shift. I took a deep breath, calmed my shaking hands, and waited for the next real customer.
Exactly 10 minutes later, at 2:25 a.m., my system chimed again. The caller ID popped up on my screen. Unknown number. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. I was angry now. I decided that if it was the same prankster, I was going to give him a piece of my mind before hanging up. I clicked answer. "Security support," I said, dropping the friendly tone entirely. There was no laughter this time. Instead, I heard a woman sobbing. It was a desperate, suffocating sound. "Please help me," she whimpered, her voice trembling violently. "He's inside my house." Since we worked for a home security company, we did occasionally get actual emergency calls before they were routed to 911. My anger instantly vanished, replaced by pure adrenaline. "Ma'am, try to stay calm," I said, frantically typing on my keyboard. "What is your address? I can dispatch local police to your location right now. Who is in your house?" The woman choked back a sob and whispered, "I'm pushing my security camera's live feed to your system. Please look, he's coming toward me." Right at that moment, a video window popped up on my desktop. It was a feature our software had that allowed agents to verify equipment issues. The screen flickered, and a grainy night vision live feed of a dark living room filled my monitor. I stared at the monitor, completely paralyzed. The camera was mounted high up in the corner of the ceiling. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the pale, cold moonlight cutting through a large window. "Ma'am, I have your video feed open. Where are you hiding?" I asked, looking for any movement. She didn't reply. Only her terrified breathing came through the line. I scanned the grainy video. In the center of the room sat a large couch, and standing directly behind that couch, draped in the shadows, was a figure. It had the shape of a man, but its posture was completely unnatural, stiff, rigid, and entirely motionless. He was dressed in solid black, but what made my blood run cold was his face. The moonlight hit him just right, revealing his features. His eyes were wide, completely white and unblinking, and carved across his face was a sickening, impossibly wide grin that stretched from ear to ear. He wasn't looking around the room. He was staring directly up at the camera lens. He knew someone was watching him through a computer screen miles away. He was staring right at me. "Ma'am!" I screamed into my headset. "He's right behind the couch. Get out of the house right now!" But before the words could fully leave my mouth, the figure in the video lurked forward. He didn't walk like a human. He moved with a jerky, disjointed, stop-motion-like stride, coming directly toward the camera. As he got closer, his distorted, smiling face filled my entire screen.
Right as the face hit the lens, the woman on the phone let out a horrific, curdling scream. The video feed violently glitched and cut to black with a flashing message, "Signal lost." The phone line went completely dead. I ripped my headset off my ears, threw it onto my desk, and stood up so fast my chair rolled back into the cubicle wall. I was hyperventilating, sweat dripping down my forehead. The other two agents on the floor looked at me like I had lost my mind. I sprinted into the supervisor's office, shook him awake, and frantically explained what I had just witnessed. My supervisor blinked, rubbed his eyes, and sighed. "Ryan, you're working the graveyard shift. Your brain is playing tricks on you. It was probably just a customer playing a clip from a horror movie to mess with the new guy." To prove it to me, he led me down to the IT and security desk at the end of the hall, where our internal server logs and the office building's own security monitors were kept. He woke up the IT guy on duty and told him to pull up the logs for my last call. The IT guy typed a few commands into his terminal, tracking my workstation's IP address. But as he looked at the results, the color completely drained from his face. Sir," the IT guy stammered, pointing at the monitor, "Ryan didn't receive any external calls over the network in the last 30 minutes. That video feed wasn't an outside line." "What do you mean?" I shouted. "I was literally just watching a woman's house get broken into." The IT guy turned the monitor toward us, his finger shaking. The source code for that video feed, it didn't come from a customer's account. It came from an internal closed-circuit camera right here in this building, specifically the abandoned storage wing in the basement.
The room felt like it was spinning. The dark room I had been looking at wasn't some stranger's house in another state. It was the old, abandoned basement of our own office building, a place littered with broken office furniture and old corporate couches. But what about the woman's scream? There were no women working on our floor that night. My supervisor didn't say another word. He grabbed his radio, alerted the main building security guard, and told him to meet him at the basement doors. The IT guy and I stayed behind, staring at the security monitors. We watched the camera feed as the supervisor and the armed guards stepped into the pitch-black basement storage unit, their flashlights cutting through the thick dust. They swept the room, checking behind the stacks of old desks. The room was empty. There was no man in black and no sign of any woman. But then, the guard panned his flashlight across the back concrete wall, right behind an old dust-covered couch. When the light hit the wall, neither I nor the IT guy could breathe. Scribbled across the concrete in thick, wet, dark red paint, or blood, were words written in massive, frantic letters. The message read, "I am still on the line, Ryan." I never spent another second in that building. I walked out that very night and emailed my resignation letter the next morning. The police came and searched the entire industrial park, but they never found any evidence of an intruder breaking into the facility, nor did they ever find out who wrote that message. The IT department officially concluded that it must have been a highly sophisticated hack from a disgruntled former employee who pre-recorded the video and painted the wall earlier. But deep down, I know what I saw. The way those wide, porcelain-white eyes stared directly into the camera, that wasn't a regular human being. It's been years since that night. I work a regular 9-to-5 office job now, completely away from customer service. But to this day, whenever my phone rings from an unknown number, my chest tightens, and those brief, quiet 2 seconds after I pick up, before the person on the other end says hello, I pray that I won't hear the sound of heavy breathing in a dark room, followed by that horrific, distorted laugh. Because some calls can never be hung up.